How would you feel if someone made a judgment or a presumption about you because of where you come from? In a country, the UAE, where we have over 220 nationalities working side by side and interacting in our daily lives, we have so much to gain from the diversity. And at the same time, we have so much to learn too. Our prejudgments can be dangerous and determine the way we think, behave, and speak. Many years ago, during COVID, we still mention COVID every now and then. I completed a program with eCornell, which was on the topic of diversity, inclusion, and equity. For me, it was an eye opener from the biases we have, the way we make decisions, the way we think about others the first time we meet them. We can really make someone feel amazing or another person feel like crap. Some of us are direct, others are gentler in our approach. And this means we need to really learn to appreciate other cultures and oftentimes step out of our own ways. Culture means so many different things to different people. It's a label we apply to people, an organization, and a country. With the world becoming closer and closer than ever, understanding culture is critical. And this is why cultural intelligence is so important. In today's episode, I am really delighted to introduce one of the key voices of cultural intelligence in the Middle East, Emma Jordaan, who is a cultural intelligence thought leader. She's an international training facilitator and the author of this wonderful book called Dubai Decoded. As the founder of Infinite Consulting, Emma helps leaders and organizations decode those complexities of multicultural workplaces. Some of the things that we've probably all experienced throughout the world, whether we're in the UAE, in the UK, in the US, or any other country, we've all come across different cultures. So, yes, we are different. We are also human, unique, and we have more in common than we realize. So, let's really delve into this conversation and this topic to understand more about cultural intelligence and what it means for us in the world that we operate in today. Welcome to today's episode, Emma. It is amazing to have you here, and I'm grateful for you taking time out to be here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have today.
Wonderful. So, Emma, people will be listening to this episode of the You Got This podcast, and they'll be thinking, oh, here we go. We've got all these different types of intelligences. What does cultural intelligence really mean? Before we would go into the details of what it can do and how it can help.
Sure. So, in a nutshell, cultural intelligence is the ability to work and relate effectively with different cultures or diverse cultures. It's made up of four components, which is the CQ drive, which is your motivation to learn about different cultures or be accepting of other cultures. CQ knowledge, which is the knowledge that you have of other cultures. The third one is CQ strategy. So, what strategies are you putting in place to be effective when you're in a multicultural situation? And then the fourth one is action, CQ action. So, what actions are you then adopting to kind of impact the way that or change the way that you behave in that situation?
Okay, really interesting. And these four elements that you've spoken about, um, what makes this topic and the areas you focused on, what makes it so important in the world today and like the region we live in?
So, well, specifically here within the UAE or Dubai for me and Abu Dhabi for you, it's so multicultural. There's lots of different people coming to here as expats working in the region, but from different countries, and so it's important that we've got the ability to work effectively with one another. But beyond, the UAE. There's lots of geopolitical issues at the moment, which means that people are moving into different countries, and just that globalization is causing people to choose to live in different places to where they were brought up, And even if you're still living and working in the place where you grew up, you're likely to be involved in, virtual conference calls with people from different countries. And so, even if you're working in a much more homogenous culture, locally, there's still a need to be able to work with colleagues from different countries as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, isn't it? Regardless of the type of work we do, we are going to have that exposure of different cultures, and so we can't shy away from it. And oftentimes, we may even feel that, oh, I know so much about a culture because I grew up in it, or a lot of my friends are of that culture, but that may not be true in reality.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time when we judge a culture, we're looking at the surface level understanding of culture. So we're looking at, what can we see about the culture? What do we know? What can we hear in the language? But when we're talking about cultural intelligence, we're actually taking a much deeper look at culture, and we're looking at, and how does it impact the way that we behave? How does it impact our assumptions, our expectations, our values, our intrinsic values that are ingrained within us?
Yeah, really important. And um, so from your accent, you're from the UK. Obviously, I know you, and I would love for our audience to know a bit about you as well. So, like, where did this interest and this passion for cultural intelligence come from for you?
Sure. Yeah. So I am originally from the UK, and my career has given me the opportunity to work in continental Europe, in multiple different countries there, and then for the last 10 years, I've been based here within the GCC. And each time I've gone to work in a new country, I've noticed and observed some different cultural nuances where at times I've called into question, the other person's capability or their competence, or just thought things were really unusual, the way that somebody was tackling something, or their approach, or their response to me. Even, if I'd verbalized something, the response I would get back would sometimes surprise me as well. And yet, when you're in that situation, you can see that everybody else from that culture sees that this is a normal behavior or a normal response, and so you recognize then that you're almost the the odd one out, even though it feels so unusual or strange to you. You're the one, that's that doesn't see this as a norm. And so that just got me fascinated in terms of the way that people behave in the workplace. And so when I set up my own business a few years ago, I've been in learning and development for the last 20 years, but I set up my own training consultancy a few years back. And I really realized that actually, understanding culture is something that's imperative for this region, with it being so multicultural. And it's something that I've had lots of experience in. And so I thought, well, let's kind of intertwine the two things, and offer cultural intelligence as a topic to people.
Okay, wonderful. And so you introduced the four different areas as we open today's episode. Are there things more specific around cultural intelligence that you want to like delve into a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think cultural intelligence is probably seen as a bit of a kind of pink and fluffy HR topic. It's a soft skill. It's a nice to have, but it isn't necessarily something that's given the airtime that it perhaps needs to have. People aren't always yet still seeing its relevance and its importance within the organization. If you think about even something as simple as onboarding um, a new employee that's an expat from a new country into the region, um, the success of that can be fully determined based on how well you make them feel part of the team. And going, going into what does the onboarding process look like, and actually putting some strategy behind that instead of just thinking about, okay, well, we just need to give them a tour of the office and we just need to introduce them to the team, and actually thinking, okay, gosh, this person's from this place, they're going to be integrated into a team of people that are all from these places. These are the typical cultural values that we would see amongst those people. And how is that then going to play out when we're trying to, trying to get them to work effectively as a team? And that isn't necessarily something that's going to come naturally unless you've actually pointed it out to people that you will see cultural differences with your peer group, but these are the ways that you can then look at working more cohesively with one another. So cultural intelligence has a huge impact on the business success, on its turnover, on its bottom line, because it impacts things like your employee attrition. It impacts your employee satisfaction, which ultimately impacts things like your customers' experience, either your employees' productivity. So it has a huge impact on the numbers as well.
Yeah, and it's so true, and it's something we can't ignore. Organizations, leaders, employers, like it's so necessary to have that effective working environment. And it's really interesting you said that, like, as more expats start moving, for example, to the UAE, like I get messages and emails and LinkedIn messages from people saying, "Hey, I'm moving to the UAE. What do I need to know?" Or "I'm looking for an opportunity." And so there is that influx coming in. So I would say if anyone is planning to come to the UAE, look up Emma, because she'll definitely be the one that can guide you on this journey. Um, on Instagram, a thought's just come into my mind. On Instagram a little while ago, one of the influencers, she made a comment about the way that people dress in the UAE, not respecting the culture, so to speak, because they're dressed in maybe a beachwear type of outfit out in public. Like when you think of something like that, or if you read something like that, when you look at it with your cultural intelligence lens, how does that make you feel?
It makes me a bit cross, actually. I'm a bit frustrated. When people arrive into a new country, I think it's really important to take some time to actually study and understand the culture of the country, to understand how can you potentially show the right level of respect, and how might you want to behave in certain situations. So somebody coming into the UAE as this example, and walking along the street with a bikini top on, it's so culturally unacceptable in this region. And it's just something that shouldn't be done. Now, is it something we do see quite often? Yes. Does that mean it's okay? No, no, in my opinion. I think it's really important that you remember where you are. And because the UAE is so multicultural, some people have argued, well, what is the culture then? Because there's an increased population of expats, more than there is of the local Emirati population. But that doesn't mean to say that there isn't an Emirati culture that exists here that we have to kind of honor and respect. So yes, I think the workplace culture doesn't necessarily represent Emirati culture all the time, because an office may not have any Emiratis working in it. It might be determined based on the nationalities of the employees within that organization, but that doesn't mean that we need to completely ignore the culture of the country that we live in, we're living amongst.
And you mentioned respect, and I think it comes down to that at the end of the day. It's like respect for the culture that we're going into, and that learning and that education becomes so critical. So yeah, thanks for sharing your opinion on that. I think I kind of put you on the spot there, but I appreciate your response. Emma, you spoke a lot about the benefits, the benefit to the bottom line, the benefit to the morale, the culture of a company when we do implement cultural intelligence. And I really would like to flip it now and say that what if we didn't implement cultural intelligence? That what are the downsides or the negative impact of not being culturally intelligent?
So there's lots of stats out there to support the importance of cultural intelligence. Just a couple that I can reel off to you. The when you bring somebody into an organization that when they're from a different country, so you've relocated them, there's a stat that suggests that 40% of those relocations fail before the employee actually achieves the objectives that they were brought here to achieve. And a further stat on that is that 70% of those failures are down to issues to do with the family. Because often I think that when we're as an organization supporting a new hire, we don't tend to go beyond thinking about the new employee. We don't think about, and how are we supporting their family as well? You have to think about, if you're bringing somebody over who has a spouse and has children, it's likely that their spouse is having to give up their career short term until they find a new placement when they actually get to their country. And children are having to kind of reestablish a place within the classroom and build new friendships. So it can be huge pressure and huge strain on that family unit to make this relocation a success. And if you want the employee to feel a sense of belonging and you want them to be able to kind of hit the ground running, you do definitely need to think about, and what are the additional things that we can support them with, so that they actually feel like the move has been easy. So, organizations might be thinking about organizing temporary accommodation for the new employee, and organizing their Emirates ID. But beyond that, they don't really think more strategically about how are we making sure that we're handholding that new employee through this whole process. Now, they say it takes about sort of 6 months to a year to actually feel like your new country or it feels like home. And so, the sooner that you can get the new employee to a place where they feel settled and it feels like home, the more, productive that person's going to be in the workplace as well. That, it's not easy for that employee to do a good job if they've got a spouse at home that's really unhappy with the circumstances that they've found themselves in, who's perhaps stuck indoors all day because maybe we haven't got we haven't got them a car yet, or they've not got a social circle yet. And so how are we going beyond thinking about just the basics, and we're actually thinking about what else can we do for the employee? So that will definitely help things like your retention rate, because you'll see an increase of voluntary labour turnover. If you've got people feeling not settled, then they're just going to end up packing up the job and going home.
Yeah, no, and we've all heard those stories. I mean, I have that experience as well. I was in a way dragged here because my husband had a job, but I didn't have a job to come to. And that feeling of that initial anxiety until you find your feet, it can be a struggle. And it would be nice for that support mechanism of some sort to be available to families of people moving over. So I really love that you shared that. Um, and what about generally, like in organizations? What should we be looking out for to ensure that there isn't that kind of culture of bullying or that clique mindset that can sometimes happen because we gravitate to what is more comfortable to us? Like, what's the downside of something like that?
Yeah, well, so the first thing I would be thinking about is, what data or information can you gather in the HR team on that to help support your investigation? So if you are looking at, are employees happy? You might have an employee net promoter score that you can review to see what is that telling you about your employees. Are they happy or not? And you might get an overall sense that generally employees are happy, but it's important that we then go beyond the overall like net promoter score and drill into looking at the scores for perhaps each individual departments. Because as an overall company, you might be doing really well, but a particular department, you may have a really different story being told. And you might then be able to link that to the voluntary labour turnover statistics that you've got within your organisation to then see actually, overall as an organisation, we're performing quite well, but particularly within our finance team, we've got an issue because we've had a high level of attrition and we've had like some poor scores on the employee net promoter survey, and that might then need a further investigation. Are people feeling unhappy within that department because they don't have a sense of belonging? They don't feel that they've got a psychologically safe space to work in, and what are we then doing to support them? So there's lots of analytics that you potentially use within the organization to pinpoint where you're perhaps having problems, whether that's down to employees feeling unhappy, but also things like, where are you potentially losing revenue because there's been miscommunications that have created costly mistakes or project delays? What can you do to increase employee morale? What's happening in terms of client relationships? Are you seeing lots of complaints from one particular employee, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that employee is not competent or technically skilled to do the job. It just means that maybe they don't know how to work effectively, with particular clients from particular cultures. If you bring a business development manager into a role and they're from one particular culture, and then they're only working with clients from another culture, but that culture is an entirely different culture, there may be different ways of communicating, there may be different ways of building relationships, there may be different ways of building trust, different understandings of time. So those can all cost the company or an organization money as well.
Yeah, no, really interesting. And I think it's an awareness in general of all of us. Like, it's not only about leadership, is it, or managers, it's us as human beings as well that how can I learn? How can I embrace? Or what do I need to do to interact with a colleague or a peer to understand, what are they all about? What is their culture about? And how does that define them or characterize them as well? Because we're all individuals and unique as well as coming from a cultural setting that we come from, right?
Yeah, I mean, cultural intelligence isn't just applied only in the workplace, it applies in all social situations as well. And understanding culture and having a much greater awareness of self enables you to understand better what's happening in different interactions. In an example I can give is when I went to a restaurant once, I asked if they had any Coke Zero, I think was the drink that I wanted, and the response was no. Now, I would naturally expect the person serving me, because of the culture I come from, to say no, we don't have that, but we have, and then for them to offer a few different options. But the culture that the person came from, I'm now able to appreciate that they perhaps come from a more authority orientated culture where you acknowledge maybe as the server that you don't have the power in that dynamic and the customer does, and therefore you would be waiting to be prompted by the customer as to what they want next. So the natural response in that situation would be just a plain no. And then it's the customer's responsibility to say, do you have an alternative to the drink that I've asked for? And they then came back to me and said, yes, we have this drink and this drink. But they were waiting for me to initiate that conversation. Now, if you don't understand those dynamics, that can be quite frustrating, because you think, why don't they just tell me what drinks they've got, instead of me having to ask the question? And that's just a very simplistic example that I can give, but one that you can see played out time and time again, both in the social situation, but also in a work situation. And when it comes to the workplace, obviously it's more crucial because it can cost money if it doesn't, if the communication isn't effective.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really important. I'm really glad you brought the example of a restaurant, because that's something that we'll all experience. We'll go into a restaurant and there could be different experiences because the people working in the restaurant, they'll make judgments based on who's walked in. And it doesn't have to just be about like the color of someone's skin. It could be how are they dressed or what kind of handbag have they got. So all of those things kind of trigger us as human beings to behave differently to different people. Like if we were to think about the restaurant world in the UAE, like are there some things that they should all do, or they should all embrace that, so that whoever walks into a restaurant gets a very similar experience and quality of service. So the reason I'm saying this is I'm making it a little bit personal. Is I went into a restaurant on my own, and I was in my weekend gear, like so chill vibe, and I can't name the restaurant, but I did complain to the lady after. But everyone around me on either side of me, the people in the suits were talking to them, like upselling things, offering them another drink, offering them another dessert and stuff like that. And there I was just observing what was happening. And I don't know why, because I didn't make it about anything specific, but I did ask her. I was like, I'm very interested to know why you didn't offer me dessert, or, you know, the suits were walking around everywhere else. And at first she denied it. And I said, look, I don't want you to do anything. All I'm doing is giving you my observation. And then so she said, okay, we'll take it on board. So in situations like that, it could be a cultural intelligence thing, it could be something else. Like, what could the service industry do to make sure when a customer walks in, they don't feel like they haven't been treated well?
Well, in terms of the hospitality industry, the importance is making sure that the customer has a good experience. But I suppose what's interesting is that what makes a good customer experience looks different across different cultures. So it's quite a hard job, really, to determine like how should you respond or behave towards the customer. And each customer that comes through, because what one customer wants is not necessarily what another wants. I mean, you could argue that you'd want, your staff to be polite and forthcoming with information potentially. But again, what does polite look like across cultures? Some cultures, polite looks waiting to be spoken to. Sometimes polite looks like being direct and tell me what you want, because it's more helpful if you're explicit with your explanation. So it's a tough one, I suppose. I think the one thing that I find interesting in terms of the restaurant trade here within the UAE is that a number of the people that are doing the frontline roles potentially come from cultures where they're not necessarily exposed to restaurant culture. And it's a topic of conversation that I've had with somebody else that was saying, if you've well, I've come from the UK, and I suppose you could argue that my upbringing is quite privileged, then in versus some of the people that might be living and working within the UAE. And because of that, then I've had exposure to the restaurant culture. And from a very young age, my parents took me to restaurants. I understood when the server came over how they were supposed to approach the table and what they were supposed to say to us. But if you are doing that role in the UAE as a frontline worker and you've never had that exposure to restaurant culture, how do you know what you're supposed to say when you get to the customer's table? And so I think there's a lot of things that are taken for granted, like a level of understanding of what good looks like in this region. And sometimes we have to be a lot more explicit in terms of explaining to our frontline workers, though, this is our expectations, this is what we want to see from you. And bearing in mind as well, a lot of those frontline workers would typically come from more authority orientated cultures as well. So they do require and expect more explicit instructions from the people that they report to. So yeah, it's an interesting one, not one that I think I'm going to be able to easily solution for you though.
It's okay. And I am glad that I brought it up, because it takes me nicely to my next question, which is, it could be none of that. It could be like, for example, we may think that someone is treating us a certain way because it's to do with culture, but it may not be culture. It may be personality, and there could be a personality clash. And before we start going down this rabbit hole of, oh, someone is judging me because of my culture, like, how do we really decipher what's going on? And this can happen in like the work, it can happen anywhere, right? Like in society, in the workplace, in our personal lives. Before I turn it into, oh, this is a cultural thing, how do I decipher that, what's really going on type feeling?
Yeah, I think, well, if they're behaving towards you in a way that you feel is a bit unfair, the first thing I'd ask is, does the situation kind of require it? Like, has something drastic happened in the office, which any normal person would maybe be frustrated with, and are they taking that frustration out on you? So that's the first thing. What is the situation? Does it call for the behavior? Um, and maybe you're just unfortunately the person that's there. So that might not be culture, that might just be the circumstances. The second I would say is, are they like this with everybody in the office, or are they like this only with you? And therefore you can like perhaps start to recognize or maybe take less offense and say, oh, they're not picking on me. They're just like that with everybody. You know, they're so blunt and rude and abrupt when they communicate. Oh, okay, they communicate like that with everybody. So that would be the second thing. And then the third thing is you could then start to think about, well, what are their cultural values and how do they differ to mine? So, you know, the example I've just given there is around communication. Maybe I'm a more indirect communicator. Perhaps they come from a more direct communication, sorry, a direct orientated communication culture. That was a mouthful. Um, and so, you know, they generally are likely to be more direct in the way that they communicate. So those would be the three things that I would think about. That would then help you to determine, is this a cultural thing or is this a personality? Or is this actually, you know, maybe a dislike to me personally? In which case, then you can then think about, well, what action would I want to take? If it's culture, you know, maybe there isn't any action. Maybe it's just about you being open-minded to flex and adapt your assumptions about the way that they should communicate to you and recognize, oh, they're going to communicate to me more directly. And maybe when they do, I just need to pause and remind myself of that before I then take immediate offense to what they've said.
No, definitely. And that, in essence, when I talk about emotional intelligence, is very much related to that, is having an awareness of yourself. What are your triggers? And at the same time, an awareness of others. And it's educating, growing, informing ourselves, which becomes really important. So if we were going to look at this from an organizational perspective, so you've shared like some really amazing tips and things that can happen. How does an organization even start to understand the role of cultural intelligence in their workplace? Um, because if they don't have these policies, processes, systems, structures in place, then they won't know where to start. So, what kinds of things could they do to get on that journey of CQ?
So I would probably look at the employee life cycle, you know, look at the key touch points where we interact with employees. So what does the onboarding look like? You know, well, sorry, step back one further. What does the recruitment process look like? You know, where are we recruiting from? Are we recruiting from diverse places? Or are we always taking a pool of people from the same place? And that could be country, but that could also be, you know, age, for example. You know, do you go to universities to try and take on, you know, people that are going into the workplace for the first time, or are you always looking for people that are, you know, that have got particular length of service, for example, or you always recruiting in from India instead of looking at, you know, other places within the world where you could find people with the same sort of skill set that you're looking for, so that you have a much more diverse team, because you know, when you've got well, what I would say is if you're looking at your organization and you don't and you can see pockets of departments that are, you know, made up of one demographic of people, then I would say probably haven't got high level of cultural intelligence happening within your organization. And you could argue, well, yeah, but if we've got everybody from the same nationality working in the team, then it just makes it really simple and easy to manage the team because they're all tackling all the day-to-day tasks from the same cultural lens and the same approach. But with that, you don't then get you know, diversity of thought. You end up having a situation where you have groupthink. There's you know, a famous example of that with the NASA Challenger, the aircraft or air shuttle that exploded because there was too many people around the table that kind of came from the same demographic. When the engineers were trying to say, look, there's an issue, the other people were saying, no, we're just going to go ahead and do, you know, launch anyway. And then the shuttle launched and you know, we all know what happened next. It exploded. So we need to try and create a diversity within the organization. So it starts with recruitment, onboarding. We've talked about how do we support the employee, but then how are we performance managing the employees? You know, what good looks like in an employee may not be what good looks like for another person. You might, as a manager, say, well, this person never contributes in team meetings. They always sit with silence and they never say anything. So you might argue that they're not very innovative, they're not very forthcoming, they're not very good at sharing their ideas, they're not very good at collaborating. That might be the narrative of a leader. But actually, if you consider the fact that this person may come from a culture where they have to wait to be asked to speak, they maybe don't feel the freedom to speak up in meetings. It's not that they don't have anything to, they don't have any value to add. It's just that they don't feel the freedom to add it in that moment. And so somebody might be being scored down on their performance review for poor performance when actually it's culture and they just don't feel the freedom to speak up. So, like I say, you can look at the whole employee life cycle and say, in each of those areas, what are we doing to make sure that we're being culturally intelligent so that we're creating a space where our employees feel a sense of belonging, feel heard, and feel valued?
I love that because it's taking a holistic view of the experiences an employee goes through. And that example of meetings, it is understanding about, okay, the personalities of the people and the cultural layer that comes with it, that the manager can then say, be more proactive and say, okay, Joe Blogs, what's your view, or how would you take it forward? Because suddenly you're bringing that person into the conversation, so then they know it's safe. Goes back to the psychological safety. So it is an ongoing process to really to make it work. So I love that what you've shared about that employee life cycle. I'd love to hear some scenarios and examples of your experiences around the whole cultural intelligence theme and topic, um, that can be used as anecdotes that we can share with our audience. Is there anything that you can share? Obviously, we don't want names or anything like that, just some general things that could be useful.
So, in terms of my own experiences of, yeah, so one of the scenarios I faced, so I regularly deliver training workshops, and at the beginning of every workshop, I always set the ground rules. Um, Coming back to that topic of does the person feel the freedom to speak up? And I try and set the tone in the ground rules of, you know, feel the freedom to speak up if you've got anything you want to add. As much as I'm the one that's at the front of the room facilitating, I feel like, you as people within the organization will have a lot of value to add to the conversation. So please, if you've got anything to add, feel free just to interject. And I even say, and if it makes you feel better, you can pop your hand up in the air, if you don't feel comfortable interrupting me. So I really try and, play that, creating it safe space. But at the beginning, I found it was quite difficult to still get people to feel the freedom to speak up. And so a um, uh, couple of tactics that I've used is things like at the very beginning, introducing interactive polls where I allow people then to answer a question anonymously, and then I um, um, champion like the responses that they've given, uh, and say, yeah, that's such a great idea. Thanks for sharing that. Just so that I validate people's views and opinions in the session, so that that then immediately maybe makes them feel a bit safe. But I've used those sort of tactics, but there was one example where I'd done all of the above that I've just mentioned, and yet there was one gentleman in my training room that just didn't feel the freedom to interrupt me or speak up, and so there was just a really slight flinch of his finger. He had his arms folded, but he raised his finger just slightly. And if I hadn't been, because I say with cultural intelligence, you have to also actively listen as well. You're not just listening to the words that are spoken, but you're also looking for the non-verbal cues too. And it was just a slight flinch of his finger that helped me to identify, oh, this guy's got something to say. So I looked over and I said to him, did you want something to do you want to add something? And then he was able to feel the freedom then to add, and obviously, definitely added some value to the conversation. But if I hadn't have, took the time to look around the room to see if anything was being said, then I would have missed that opportunity. So I think also coming from a culture which is more direct in the way that it communicates, we naturally don't literally allow any time for air. You often find in more direct cultures that people speak over one another and there's not many pauses in conversation. And so one of the things that I try to do is, uh, especially in the training space, is allow for what I might describe as an awkward silence because of the culture I come from, but actually it could be described in another culture, just silence or pause. And in doing so, that meant then that I was able to look around the room and see what was happening. And that pause enabled me to see that somebody had something to say.
Mm. I love that. That's amazing. And thanks for sharing that example. I think it is important to kind of bring it to life. And I loved what you said about the nonverbal cues, because those leaders, those managers, those coaches that notice those micro, like that move of a finger is a micro movement, isn't it? And you happen to hold that space, be in that moment and notice that. And I think that becomes so critical in today's workplace, because when people can't express or share, they'll show it in other ways, and is tuning in with that. So that's really amazing that you did that and you've shared that today as well. Um, any other tips around cultural intelligence that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Yeah, I think, well, I suppose I've perhaps touched on it there with that last point. I think the biggest thing for me is to think about, just pausing your assumptions for a moment. I've been quoted to say a few times that I genuinely believe that people don't get up in the morning and think about how difficult can I be today, and who can I annoy with my behavior. I think genuinely people wake up, want to do a good job, and if then when you're interacting with that person, you're experiencing something different than that, then you know don't always assume that the person's being deliberately difficult. Recognize that actually maybe there's a cultural difference. Maybe they're just abrupt in the way that they're more direct in the way that they communicate than I do. Maybe they've turned up 5 minutes late for the meeting because they value time in a different way to me. It's not because they're trying to disrespect me or devalue my time. It's just because that they're less structured with their time, and they see time as something that can be more flexible. So I think, yeah, just hold your assumptions for a moment, and then with that pause, really analyze what's happening and interpret the situation so that you can then decide how you want to proceed. So I've actually got a framework that I use, which is RAPID, which stands for recognize. So recognize the situation, what's really happening, assess. So assess is about you know assess what's the importance of this meeting, what were your objectives, what do you want to get out of it, and therefore also that helps you think about actually how do I want to play this meeting. Because if it's a client meeting and they're being like what you might perceive as difficult, you might want to just say to yourself, well, I'm going to accept that because it's a client, and this is the way that they behave, but I'm not going to make it alter in a negative way the way that I respond to them, because I want to see success out of this client meeting. So that's the A. The P is the pause, which we've talked about. I is interpret, so interpret what's happening, and then D is decide. So recognize, assess, pause, interpret, decide.
Wonderful. I love that. What a beautiful model to use. Does it feature in your new book, Dubai Decoded?
Yes, it does actually. Yes, so thanks. Nice plug there for the book. So yeah, the book basically is called Dubai Decoded, and the reason for that is because the first chapter does give you a bit of an overview of the culture here within Dubai in terms of Emirati culture. But the rest of the book is talking about a cultural framework that I've developed called Culture Vantage. And it kind of stands on the shoulders of the ones that have gone before in terms of I've looked at what are the five key challenges that I see time and time again with my clients within the region, and decided to build a framework specifically on those 5 key areas. But I've also used a language that's simplistic for people to understand in this region. And the reason for that is there's a large population of people here are speaking English as a second language. So if I'm going to build a model that people are going to be able to regularly use and communicate and use as their kind of their collaborative language that we're going to use as an organization, it needs to be with simplistic language that everyone can understand. So, when models are using words like egalitarianism or high context, it's either words that you've never heard before, or it's terminology that doesn't make sense to you if you're not a cultural intelligence thought leader. So I've just used simplistic language that helps to explain the different cultural values. So the book is wrapped around that framework, and then also what strategies can we then put in place to be more effective when we acknowledge that we're working with people with different cultural values to ourselves. And then the rapid model kind of helps to cement those thoughts around strategy.
Wonderful. That sounds amazing. So where can we get hold of this book?
So you're going to make me say the name of the bookstore at Dubai Mall. You and we spoke about this before, and we said it a different way. So I say Kinokuniya, and you say.
Kinokuniya.
So everyone knows the big Japanese bookstore in the Dubai Mall, so you can buy it from there. It's also now available in Virgin Megastore as well, and then online. You can buy it from the Japanese bookstore, but you can also buy it from Amazon.com, and it's also available in Kindle as well.
Wonderful. And how can people get hold of you if they're interested to know more about your services, hold workshops, attend your training sessions? What's the best way to contact you?
So I'm available on LinkedIn. It's Emma Jordaan with a double A, Jordaan. So I'm also living in a cross-cultural marriage as well. So that's even another element that means I have to really understand culture. So yeah, on LinkedIn, Emma Jordaan, and then also they can visit the website, which is infiniteconsultingme.com.
Wonderful. That sounds amazing. So, to our audience, thank you for taking time to listen to this episode of the You Got This podcast. A big thank you to our guest, Emma Jordaan, for being here today. And we hope that this episode and this topic gives you all food for thought. And remember, you've got this.